G'day. Welcome to the AgriCoach podcast for families on the land who want to grow their family's wealth and prosperity across the generations. I'm your host, Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. As I've said many times on previous episodes and on the last episode with Nikko and Jade Lord, for over 25 years, I've been really fascinated by what makes some families on the land become prosperous, both now and across the generations. What I've come to realise is that the common trait that most of these prosperous families have is that the agribusiness is run by what I call a high-performing family. Just as a reminder, because I mentioned it in last episode, a high-performing family is characterised by not only being a bloody good producer, but also they're focusing on strong, positive family relationships, they've got effective communication within the family, and they've worked out the ability to work collaboratively towards common goals. So last episode, I interviewed Nikko and Jade Lord, who Nikko's the son of Ardie and Kacie, who we're interviewing today. Just as a reminder, I interviewed Ardie and Kacie and Nikko and Jade live at Rockhampton Beef Week back in May for Rabobank. And the Lord family are absolutely, in my eyes, a high-performing family. If you haven't heard that original episode at Beef Week, I'd recommend you go back and have a listen. It was episode number 72. And if you haven't listened to Nikko and Jade, go back to last episode and have a listen and see what you think. Now, for those of you who don't know who the Lord family are, they run around 25,000 head of cattle up in far north Queensland. Ardie and Kacie, who we're talking to today, laid the foundations of the business, and Nikko and Jade, along with their three children, Jocko, Sandy and Ruby, live on farm and are driving the business forward. Jade grew up in Brisbane and she isn't from the land, but she's assimilated in and doing an amazing job. Nikko has two off-farm siblings, Zara and Ali, and whilst they may not be directly involved in the operational aspects of the business, they are involved overall. And we're going to be digging into that with Ardie today. Now, without further delay, I want to get cracking. So welcome to Ardie and Kacie.
Hello, Ben.
Hello, Ben.
Great to have you both back. It was after the Rocky event. It's been a very much an anticipated recording on my behalf. So where I want to kick off with today is we had a cracker of an event up at Beef 24 in Rockhampton this year. And I personally got some really exceptional feedback about it. And a lot of people saying, hey, we'd love to hear more from Ardie and Kacie. So just starting off with you, Ardie, do you mind sharing quickly some feedback that you both received?
Just a number of phone calls, and I think it prompted some thoughts from different spectrums, from people we'd had close associations and probably deep discussions with. I think that's all. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. What about you, Kacie?
I got feedback from the most extraordinary people who were not at Beef, but friends of friends of friends who had been at Beef and they'd shared it. And just simple little things. There was quite a few with young families, and one of the things they took out of it that they were going to start having family meetings with their kids, even though the kids are only, 5 and 7 and, fairly young. But they really took away the value of having those family meetings and getting the communication going in the family at an early age. And I really loved that feedback. But lots of phone calls. And I suppose there's also a certain sadness in the feedback because a lot of the phone calls were from people who don't know where to go or are completely lost with succession.
Do you know the number one bit of feedback? I think you said it, Kacie, was the ultimate goal of what you and Ardie were trying to achieve was that at the end of the day, everyone can sit around the table at Christmas and enjoy each other's company. And I think that came across really clearly in the Rocky interview that was your number one focus. And whilst it's not always been easy, that's been your lighthouse that you've always come back to.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely our guiding light. And for me, it's what's the conversation I have to have today so that we are all having Christmases together in 20 years' time.
No, beautiful. I love that one.
It's a huge, big motivator.
Excellent. Well, look, Ardie, where I want to start off, because this is all about succession, and you guys are sort of a fairly hefty way along the succession process with you and Kacie moving sort of up into that retirement or transitioning to sort of a semi-retirement phase and Nikko being locked in and the girls doing their thing off farm and being involved in the business. But where I want to start, Ardie, is you mentioned that you started the succession journey way back in the 1990s when your son Nikko and your two girls, Ali and Zara, were really quite young. So that's something that a lot of people don't do today, let alone, 30 years ago. How did that come about so early, mate?
It came about, probably you have to give a lot of the credit to the RCS program. We got involved in a number of probably our own workshops and then the realisation that was to ask the kids what they want to do. I think one of the first things that came up with is if they find their passion, they'll be far more successful at whatever they do to follow their dreams. And so early on, probably at the ages of about 8 to about 11, I think, we had a goal-setting workshop and the kids did that. And amazingly, it's very much the things they're passionate about today. And then we took that forward with what was to be an annual meeting where it was relatively informal, but it was held as a meeting where we shared with the kids where we're at, what our intentions were and what our goals were and a bit of our balance sheet. And they shared what their thoughts were and just hearing what they wanted to do was a really strong, powerful thing for us. And I remember one situation where Ali was really clear about what she wanted to do in life, and she's about 8 or 9 at the time, and she said, I want to run some of the biggest events in the world. And she had a big cruise ship and she was going to run these events, and sure enough, 25 years later, she's doing exactly what she is passionate about and very good at. And that was a big lesson for us. And in that early stage, it's extracting what your passion is, understanding the difference about what you're good at and understanding what you're passionate about is a really powerful dissection, to be clear on that.
It's interesting. You mentioned something there about sharing your balance sheet. So profit and loss and balance sheet. So what your assets are, what your liabilities are. And I know a lot of families, even with 25 and 30-year-old kids, are frightened to show their kids what their actual gross worth is or their net worth is, more importantly. And they're really worried that it's going to warp them and turn them into being, I suppose, entitled. We're worth $1 million or $50 million. They're going to become entitled. What made you show the kids straight away from an early age those balance sheets? And was it the right thing to do?
I think the one thing that's not taught in school is financial literacy and education. I think it's not taught well. And even today, we'll reflect back to each individual person's balance sheet, not just ours. So we did that in our succession meeting only a few months ago. And educating everyone, what it is to run a profitable business. It's very easy. We spend a lot of time teaching our kids to ride a horse, to muster cattle, to do school, to do whatever they choose to do. But we spend very little time training them to manage money, training them to manage finances. And they're all different. Some kids are just naturally
shrewd.
Shrewd is the word I was looking for. And other kids are very, have a lot of trouble managing balance sheets. So it's a bit of a personality thing. But it's certainly something that we need to teach from an early age.
It's interesting, when I was interviewing Nikko and Jade the other day, we were talking about they did their first couple of family meetings and they said with the boys it was a bit of chaos. And because and it's funny because I said the same thing happens with Sophie. I said, except I've got a girl, so she's less chaotic, but there's a whole lot of eye rolling going on at the whole time. But I think the secret is you just got to be persistent. Would you say that's the case, Kacie?
Absolutely. And just backing up on, were we concerned about showing them what our net worth was and was that going to lead them to being entitled? That was certainly not something that I was concerned about, because what I knew was that we all did everything on the property. The kids were always out of bed, pulling their boots on, pulling their hats on and doing whatever mum and dad were doing to keep the show on the road. So there was never any question of anybody kicking back and looking at the balance sheet and saying, well, this is really good. We're pretty lucky. They grew up knowing that they had to work for it.
And it is a problem because a lot of families, we talked about this the other day, a lot of families have children and they turn up, they're either fearful they'll become entitled or they actually do become entitled. And it can become a little bit toxic in a situation. Have you seen much of that out in, just in general terms out in society, Kacie?
Look, there's a lot of it there. And it's not that the parents ever intended that to happen. I think when the kids are given everything, that's what leads to kids feeling entitled. When they're given a new car when they leave school. I must admit we were the opposite. Ardie had this theory that when the kids left school, he wanted to get them sober and broke.
And I think from another conversation we had, it was also in debt as well to say they had to work for it.
Yep, absolutely. So, and we had the conversation we had with the kids when they left school was, okay, you guys, we've given you love, security and discipline. We've done your teeth. We've given you an education. You're on your own now. But we did qualify it and say that if they chose to do more study, we would fund their tuition, but we were 150% clear we would never fund their lifestyle again. And to the kids' credit, they've never come and asked us to fund their lifestyle.
That's a difficult conversation for a lot of parents to have.
Sorry, just to add into that, it was sober, broke and hungry because they would have been at schoolies. Next job is to get them broke, and the third job is to get them hungry, because I think that's where most of the learning in life comes from.
I love that, Ardie. I love that. And also, too, you mentioned something to me the other day as well when we were chatting, is your goal was to drive the business forward for yourselves and the next generation and take on debt. So you always made them understand that, you know, there was assets there, but there was also debt. And then if there was some equity, you just literally go borrow some more money and buy another place or some more cattle. Was that your philosophy?
Well, that was probably my belief anyway, my story, whether it was my philosophy, but that's what we did, yes.
It's how you operated.
It's how I operated, yes.
Definitely.
And it worked well, obviously.
It was from a little belief that I had from something my father casually said to me when I was 17, and I sort of made up a story that I'd proved to him that I could do something, that I could do it. And I probably set myself and my family on that journey for 40 years because of it. So that comes back to understanding your beliefs. But I think one thing I'd just like to clarify with entitlement and kids and money is that we always paid our kids. We paid them from the time they were little. I don't say we paid them, overly paid them, but we always paid them enough money to be able to buy what they wanted to buy and to learn those lessons at a young age, whether it be pocket money. So when they came home from holidays, they got paid a certain amount of money and that was their pocket money. That bought their clothes so they were making choices right through school about what they were going to spend their money on. They had to earn it and then they were to spend it. And so one of the things that I feel strongly about, that it's really nice that kids are responsible for what money they earn. And if we don't have any promises or IOUs, it won't come back to bite us down the track. Like, I'd never ask the kids to work for us for free. And for that reason, I don't believe I have any IOUs. So any IOUs are given, and the IOUs that we've worked to give our kids since has been the opportunity to borrow money, the opportunity to have a crack at something, or the opportunity to lease an asset. It's opportunity that young people crave for. If they're given something, then a lot of the lessons are not there to how to manage that or how to make it in the first place. So there's a very fine distinction between given opportunity and given something.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, when I meet most young people that are driven, they're just wanting an opportunity to make something of themselves. And I think if we can support them in that process, we'll be a much better community for it.
I had a lovely story of my brother talking to one of his sons, and one of his sons was complaining about being hungry and not enough money to live in the lifestyle he wanted. My brother said, you're probably better just getting another job, not waiting for me to give you something, because if I do, you won't ever learn to make it. And by the time you've learned to make it, you won't need me anyway. So don't worry about me.
And I have to admit, I struggle, Ardie and Kacie, with that. I mean, I've got my 8-year-old daughter and we have work that she's got to do and she gets an allowance to help her to learn to pay money. But recently we had a really live example where she borrowed a book from a friend. She loves reading. And I said, if you're going to read the books, you've got to look after these books if you're going to borrow them. So a friend lent it to her. She left it outside. It rained. It got destroyed. It had to be gone and bought. And so we made her go pay for it. And she had some money left over from her birthday that she'd been given, a voucher. And she was super excited to go to Toy World or something like that. And we said, sorry, the money's gone. That's got to pay for the new book. Well, it was terrible. It was like we'd cut her throat for 3 days. But then she came back in the end and I said, well, this is the lessons. You know, you don't look after your stuff. You've got to go pay for this. And it was like a knife in my heart watching her cry about not getting to go. But that's what we've got to do as parents, don't we?
It is. And, you know, it comes back to that same old thing that are we parents or are we choosing to be best friends? And if we're choosing to be parents, then you make the decisions that an adult parent would take who was mentoring a child.
Yeah.
So what you did was that was gold.
Well, it took a lot of pressure because my wife's going, you stick with it. And of course, Dad's the soft touch when it comes to his beautiful daughter. So, but we stuck with it.
Yeah. And she will never leave another book out in the rain.
No, never. So, yeah. Well, okay. So, Kacie, you're the communication ninja in the family, aren't you? And I think when we first met each other, you said, this is my favourite topic is communication and human psychology. And we've established how important communication and trust is. I think the stats show that about 60% of succession plans fail because of a breakdown in communication and trust. Now, even the families with the best communication still have times when communication gets strained or some sort of conflict comes in. For the family, and I don't want to go in specifics, but I'm guessing it wasn't always smooth sailing, even though you're a good communicator. And if it wasn't, Rosie, how do you deal with that, Kacie?
Ben, I suppose I can only hark back to a recent incident with us as a family, that you never stop learning about how you communicate. And if you ever get to a point where you think you've got it nailed, then you're wrong. And an incident we had last week, a meeting went bad that I was chairing for the family. And out of that, I realised that there was a lot of stuff I had to do differently to make those meetings better. So I think for all of us, it's about keeping the awareness of what's the end goal here. And of course, my end goal is what have I got to do to have Christmases together in 20 years' time? And this week has probably been quite an interesting week, a learning week for me about what's my role on the board as a mother, a few of those things around communication. And then I got clear that this journey never ends, and that self-awareness is such an important thing. Maybe not awareness, reflection is probably a better word on what could I have done differently? What can I do differently?
Yeah, and I think every family has little disagreements in things or different points of view, and it just depends on how you actually deal with those. And I think for some families, they think our disagreements are massive, but when you look into it, they're just little tweaks with people looking, coming from different angles. And other families go, oh, we don't have big dust-ups, and they're huge. It just comes down to what it is for your family and trying to find a way through it. So, Ardie, you've got Nikko and his wife, Jade, and the 3 grandkids on the farm, which must be amazing to have them there. And then Ali and Zara are both, off farm in the city, being entrepreneurs. And a lot of people reached out to me and said, how have you approached having off-farm siblings, especially when it comes to the concept of fairness, because they're struggling with the same issue. How have you dealt, I suppose, with the girls being off farm and Nikko being on farm, and maintained family harmony and also fairness, mate?
Ben, we're not quite through that process, but we do have a very clear roadmap. And with the assistance of Tony Hudson, we've been doing over the last 3 or 4 years a family charter so that everyone's really comfortable and everyone really understands what the next 15, 20 years is going to look like. And is it fair and how does it come up? And that's been fantastic to do that, because it initially did bring up a couple of concerns that could have grown, and they got clarified. And they got clarified particularly when we put everyone's balance sheet of where they are now and where their balance sheet might look and what we thought was fair and what our intention was. Having said that, Kacie and I haven't given any of our assets away at this stage or sold any of our assets to our children. That will happen at some stage, but we have allowed them the ability to, for Nikko has bought a couple of properties, and for the girls to invest, and we have also been investors in their business to help them get started. So at the end of the day, yes, it will be set up so that it's quite fair. Won't be totally equal, but it certainly won't be disproportionately not. If there's a reflection towards where it's not equal, it'll only be because of time spent within a business, if I can make it like that. So we've been quite fortunate because our spread is over a number of small properties, and therefore it's easy to divide and provide an even a reasonable distribution that everyone seems to be happy with. But above all, it's about communicating that everyone, there's no little hidden mumblings or subconscious gripes that is existing. And that's the important process for us, that everyone's on there. So Kacie and I actually we haven't handed our properties on as such. We lease our properties because we want the option to receive income and be able to continue going forward and most of our properties are leased to Nikko and Jade. A couple of them are within Lord and Penner. So we continue in that vein, and the same thing will happen to the girls if they want to be operating in agriculture or they want to be operating their own businesses. We've set that up so that they, with a reasonable game plan, we control the equity and we control our income, but we do support them to do something if they come with a good game plan of what they want to do.
So really you've backed them from a fairly young age, like you've mentioned, into their own businesses so they can then be entrepreneurial and have an opportunity for themselves in a different way to what you've backed Nikko so far, but it's still working out quite well. And you're sitting on the board, I think you said, of those businesses. Is that right?
That's correct. They've invited me onto their board, both girls' businesses, so I feel very entitled to be in that position. But to go back quite a while, some of the conversations that happened in their early teenage years or just leaving school years, we gave them a little bit of security to go and have a bit of money. The one rule about that money is that it was only for investing, not for spending on discretionary items. Often the conversation came up about a car, and I said, well, just pull out your wallet and see how much cash you got. That's the sort of car you can afford. So we certainly have never supported them in any way to go and buy a disposable asset like a car or anything like that. That's been their problem to raise and how to do it. It goes back to what Kacie said a little bit about education. You know, we'll support you with education, we'll support you starting investing, but we're not going to support your lifestyle. So, you know, get a job, get some money and spend what you want on your lifestyle. But this is the way it'll go. So that lesson has to come very early in life, I think. It's too late to wake up when you're 40 and sort of think, I'm going to start working for my retirement now. I think they took that well, and I think within reasonable, lots of funny stories about little old cars and some things, but mostly they went. Sometimes they're missing a cylinder or two, but it didn't cause them any dint to their ego not having a suitable car.
And so one of the things I find, Ardie, people are quite scared of is when the kids come back to them and they invite the off-farm siblings into the discussions, is they really seem to be afraid, and I understand why, that everyone will say, well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Did you find that it wasn't, you had a meeting, laid everything out, that it evolved over time just with regular family meetings about where people are going, or did it hit like a point in time and then you had to present a plan, you and Kacie as the patriarch and matriarch of the family? I
felt quite a bit we were driving it. A lot of the time was sort of like, well, why do we need this? Why do we need to work this out? But then when we got into the meetings, they became very, oh yeah, this is good. You know, we're clear about where we're going and where I can work on. So I think we kept ahead of the game. Probably one of the few times in my life, certainly kept ahead of the game in the thinking there and kept drawing that thinking forward with them. It's been an interesting process over all those years. In those formal meetings, they've been quite a learning experience in themselves for each one of the children. And it's helped them grow and develop, has it? Most definitely. The other day we were having a family meeting. I could share that as that I think I had the siblings looking at Kacie and my balance sheet and sort of saying, well, you know, we could go and if we could use a bit of that, we could do this. And I said, no, go and look at your own. Look at your own balance sheet and see where you sit with that. And then come to us with a suitable plan for doing something different, and we can acknowledge that, or we can work with you doing that. But first of all, look at where your balance sheet sits. You know, do you have any assets? What sort of income do you got? What can you support in your own right? So they've been great discussions. Did you get pushback from time to time? And again, I don't want to dig into family discussions, but my guess is there had to be pushback at some stage. And how would you have dealt with that?
The only time I can recall pushback is when Tony Hudson rang all of the family members individually and questioned them. And then those questions were aired at a family meeting. And there was a fair bit of honesty there. And at the time, there was a little bit of upheaval. We're all changing houses, so there was a bit more tension. And some of those answers brought out some interesting replies. But we sat at the table until it was sorted, and then we all ended up in tears. Really nice tears, but it took a bit of getting sorted.
Yeah. Did you find the family was stronger after that, Kacie? Because I think a lot of people worry that when you do have this, if it doesn't get resolved, it's going to break the family up.
Well, that did get resolved. I believe that everything's resolvable, that if you stay in the conversation long enough and try to see it from the other's point of view. And I love what you said last week about, do you want to be right or happy? It's a good thing to ask people, isn't it?
Mm.
And that's probably come up in the family often, but in a different context. So we've always managed through some fairly bloody conversations to all stay in the conversation long enough for it to be resolved.
Mm.
And it's nice when you can end in tears and happy tears.
Yeah. Just to elaborate that Tony's questioning was purposely probing that is there anything underlying subconscious that's sitting in the bulk of the thing that could be a niggling thought in 20 years' time, and he did that beautifully. And he poked in enough places where a couple of little minor thoughts came out. They probably weren't even conscious thoughts before they started the interviews, but he brought out a phrase we use, like, you got to get the cupboard bare. Make sure there's no thoughts, hidden agendas underneath. And Tony did a great job of that.
But there's skeletons in the closet, though, isn't there, or in the cupboard?
There always are, and there always will be. But one of the things that I think is important is, can I keep that skeleton there without it causing any upset? It's just a story. Or is it causing so much upset, then I need to deal with it? With issues, I have a 24-hour rule. When something comes up, if I can't flick it in 24 hours, then I'll go and have a conversation with whoever it is that I need to have a conversation with. Mm. And that works for me. And I think it should be the same about skeletons.
Mm.
If you can't press it down and live happily with it, go and deal with it.
Yeah. So the 24-hour rule is if you can't sort it out within 24 hours, you get back together and have a conversation about it. Is that what you're saying, Kacie?
If I can't sort it out in my mind, if I can't flick it and go, okay, this, I'm actually fine with this. It's just a story in my head. Let it go, let it go, let it go.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to be said for letting it go, but you need to be able to live with letting it go. Are you letting it go because you're not game to have the conversation? Not a good answer. So if I can't flick it in 24 hours, then I will go and have the conversation I need to have.
Yeah, because if it's niggling you, I'm guessing it's a problem that needs to be sorted out. And the other one I quite often hear people say, which doesn't work in my family, is never go to bed angry. Like both my wife and I are quite, how shall we say, strong-willed. And so we need time to cool down if we argue about things. And don't get me wrong, we don't have blow-ups, but if we get, lock horns over something. Did you find that, because you've got, 5 people in the family, you've got all different personalities. Is there a bit of a sort of herding cats? You sort of get one in and then the other one shoots out and then you grab another one and bring them in and shoots out. It takes a little bit to wrangle them all together?
No, I don't think so. Do you, Ard?
Most conflicts are usually between 2 people.
Yes.
Important part is those 2 people go and address it and the others stay out of it, except to make sure it's addressed.
That's a mistake a lot of families make, isn't it? Is it becomes this, I think I heard someone say the triangle once.
Carpen's triangle, yep.
Yeah, you fight with dad and then you go tell mum and then mum tells dad, and that was a real problem, isn't it?
I think I talked about it at Beef Week. What used to happen in my family was when there was an issue, one would ring the other, who would ring the other, who would ring the other, who would ring the other. And by the time it got back to poor mum and dad, it was completely distorted and bore no relativity to what the actual problem was. And then doing lots of work with RCS, one of the things we learned was a conversation needs to stay between the 2 people who are involved in the conversation, not about them.
Yep.
We do stick fairly well to that that's not my conversation. Go and have that conversation with the person who needs to hear it.
Yeah, that becomes a bit of a toxic thing in families if it's not addressed properly.
It becomes toxic everywhere. It can be particularly difficult on a station where you have a very small environment. And if that sort of conversation is allowed to happen, the whispers behind the back, it can get very toxic very quickly.
And we want to stamp on that really, really, really quickly.
We've done a fair bit of facilitation over the years. When things have got a little bit out of hand, then we sit everybody down and use the talking stick to get everything aired.
Yeah. Would you suggest, and listening to yourselves and also Nikko the other day, is facilitation has been really, really important for you guys. You haven't done this on your own. And I should probably say facilitation and also education. Would you say that you'd have been able to muddle your way through this on your own, just Ardie, Kacie and the kids?
No, never. Because you don't know what you don't know. So until you expose yourself to some learning, and that's when you hit these brick walls and go, oh my God, is that me? Is that how I do communicate? Is there a better way? The learning we did with RCS has been and still is extraordinary. We worked with a woman called Lynn Sykes, who did a lot of, and I think she's retired now, but used to actually run facilitation workshops. And they were awesome in setting groundwork for us.
And it's interesting, I spoke to a family a little while ago, and one of their big things was education. And they said, we've done a whole lot of personal development education on how to be better communicators, how to facilitate meetings, how to have conversations with our kids. And we expect our children to go do those courses as well and get the help to be able to develop over time. And I think that's really important, because a lot of families go, well, it costs money. But at the end of the day, you're either going to pay up front or you're going to pay later. And that cost later with family breakdown, loss of potential opportunity, at the worst case, legal expenses, I think it's a far cheaper option to get help early on than leave it till later on.
Absolutely. And Ardie and I learnt very early in our education life that whatever one did, the other had to do, because we see and hear things very differently. Ardie's a monitor evaluator and he sees things in a very clinical manner. I'm much more a red hatter, so I see the emotion in things and the opportunity in things. So we're actually a good combination, but it's awesome when we do things together because we both see and hear different things. And so all the courses that we've done, if we haven't done them together, we've done them within a short period of time, and then we got the kids to do them, so that they knew what mum and dad were on about.
Oh, so you did the same thing as well?
Yes, we're very much the same, and right through our family and business partners, very similar training.
Okay, so you're in your 60s now. I think I'm happy enough to say that, mentioning ages. But now you're in that transition to your version of retirement. So one of the things, Ardie, you said that was really important, you thought, was the older generation. A lot of parents want to give their kids a great opportunity and they want to support their children, and you've actively advocated to look after yourselves. Why is that the case, and what should people be thinking in that area?
Firstly, we're the ones that have created what we've created, so the first people to look after us ourselves. What we've given for the children is opportunity, and hopefully mentored and educated them to what they need for them to be able to achieve and follow their passion in life. Secondly, it's really important for us to keep whatever resources we choose so that we can do that. And for me, I actually enjoy business. I enjoy that space. So to actively using my brain and probably some of the things I've learnt the hard way over 30, 40 years is really important for me. So keeping the financial resources, keeping the ability to do some of those things. Too often it's like I'll step aside and I'll just go and play bowls. I love a little bit of time playing golf and bowls, but I don't want to do it full time. I'm really, really conscious that I want the resources to be able to do what I'm passionate about, and so does Kacie. So we'll look after ourselves first. We've looked after ourselves from point of view of where we're going to live. We've looked after ourselves in terms of having income and capacity going forward to be involved in whatever we choose to be involved. So, yeah, I think that comes number one. Of the two things, look after the older generation first decision. The second thing I'll say is a little bit of in contra to that, if there's a problem in succession, it's the older generation's problem. That was said at a forum that I was at a couple of years ago, and it hit home like a ton of bricks. It mightn't even be us that is the problem, but we're responsible for finding the solution and leading towards the solution if there is a problem in a family. I can't say it more clearly. We can't sit there at the top being the patriarchs of a family and turn around and sort of say that it's someone else's fault. If there's any problem there, we've obviously haven't set the pathway for the family to be there, whether it be education, whether it be opportunity. What have we done to stop that next generation coming and being their best? That was quite a light bulb for me. So
taking that path, where do you see, like now you're still actively involved in the business. I know Nikko's managing the family business and you guys are on boards, but what do you see your role is going forward? Because you're not ready to be pensioned off and, like you said, play golf and bowls 5 days a week. And I think you'd probably drive Kacie insane if you did that.
We've only got 3 grandkids. I don't know how people who had 20 get on, but that keeps us pretty busy. I've got a set of cattle yards to build. I've got a fair few things to do with that. Kacie's is teaching one of the grandchildren piano, even though she's got to learn herself in the process. Probably a bit of financial literacy, whatever we're good at. But I believe that most learning is done by 7 or 8 years of age. After that, we're honing skills. So, we've got a great opportunity spending some of our time at Sutherland, working with the younger generation, and that's an absolute joy. With our own children, I think our role is very much mentoring and just being there and being there to help in certain areas. I mean, they're quite capable of doing whatever they need to do, and it's probably more the friendship and the joy of just being a part of what they're doing is what it is for us. And then on the side of that, I've got other interests which I actually enjoy doing, and whether it's investing or being involved in mentoring others that are in similar journeys or doing something in the rural industry. So in a few cases, I really enjoy that space and just sharing a little bit of what we've learnt the hard way over many years.
It's interesting. I love that part. And Kacie, I want to hear from you as well. I really love that part about mentoring the younger generation, like the grandkids coming through. I think that's a real gap that's missing now we all live so remotely. So, Kacie, from your point of view, what do you see your role as over the next 20 years?
Ben, I think when I reflected, I think we've actually learned a little bit over the last 40 years of marriage and 67 years of life. And we're probably I'm at the stage where it really floats my boat to mentor people, to share some of that knowledge if I can make a difference in somebody's life. I do quite a bit of personal coaching, and I absolutely love doing that. I love helping somebody who's in this spot, finding out where it is they want to be and facilitating that journey. It really, really floats my boat. When I go to Toowoomba, and when we're in Toowoomba for a period of time, I really want to do the lifeline work as an education thing, but also as I think I've had a fairly privileged life and I'd like to give something back. So there's that aspect. And then, of course, there's the aspect of still being with our children, growing older with them, and then having the grandchildren. What a gift grandchildren are in this life.
I think those grandkids of yours are extremely lucky to have you both close around and wanting to actively mould them.
And I think, we're sitting on the steps one day and Nikko said, "Oh, Mum, I just want to thank you for all you do for the kids. You play such an important role with them." And I hadn't actually pulled up and thought about it before. And, yeah, we do. I think if you subscribe to the adage that it takes a village to raise a child, then I think what we're all doing here is great.
It's interesting. I reflected quite heavily back on this with my family growing up, and I had one set of grandparents that lived about 5 hours away, and they used to visit when they retired maybe twice a year when they were earlier in their retirement years and less as they got later on. And I remember they both had a really big impact on me as a kid. I know my grandfather used to come up and visit, and the first thing you do is, I had a bit of a smart mouth when I was a teenager. I'm sure you're not shocked. And I used to get myself in a whole lot of strife, stubborn and a smart mouth, and my daughters inherited that. And he used to grab me by the ear, drag me outside, and his famous sayings were, "It's not what you said, it's how you said it, Benjamin, and then come with me, we're going fencing," and we go off doing stuff. And he treated me like a young adult rather than a boy, because my parents just didn't have time. Like, they were both working on the farm. I had 2 sisters, there was stuff going on, and he used to just go down the paddock and we talk about life. And I think I was probably a pain in the neck fencing because I was young, I didn't know what I was doing, I'd stuff up all the time, but he'd make me do stuff and teach me and talk about business and money and life and where I was going to go. And that really had a profound impact on my life looking back. I would love to be able to do that when I get older, and if I'm blessed with grandchildren, is to be able to transmit some of that wisdom and knowledge and fill that gap that parents don't have the time necessarily to fill with their kids.
Absolutely. And the other thing I just thought of as you were saying that kids love somebody's undivided attention. And that's what grandparents have, the gift of being able to give. And that's a gift that your grandfather gave to you, his undivided attention, be it him screwing your ear and booting you in the bum. But that undivided attention is what they absolutely crave.
And mums and dads don't have the time. I look at my daughter, like the difference between what my wife and I are able to spend. We're busy, we've got businesses, we've got jobs to do. And whereas grandparents have that beautiful ability to be able to come in and provide that experience and wisdom. So, guys, we're coming up towards the end of us. We're running out of time now. But what I want to ask is just a quick little thing. I wrote down here on the question that I want to ask is, part of what I believe a high-performing family, what sets them apart from many other families, is the fact that they see the strength of the family unit is just as important as financial strength. So they work on both of those. So if there's people out there in the industry that have doing their best and struggling, what's one piece of advice you'd give them which you wish you got back earlier on the journey? And can we start with you, Ardie?
Ben, I think what comes to my mind firstly is when Nikko was being a little bit like you as a youthful, full of energy, not quite teenager, but thought he was 18.
Yeah, smart mouth.
Yeah, smart mouth and plenty of things happening. And my mother would ring up and just say to the both of us, you just need to get that little boy and love him a bit more. And it was great advice, that they just want your time. They want you there. That has a big role to play.
That's beautiful. What about you, Kacie?
Certainly, my mother-in-law's advice of just love them a little more transcends to kids. Every time I'm having a problem with my dogs, I just know I've just got to come back and love them a little more. But I think on a practical level, one of the most powerful things for us was actually doing outside education, not thinking that it's just okay to stay at home and keep bobbing along on the family farm. And that education and the continued education is really powerful for us. So that is probably one bit of advice, but I do love Grandma Lord's advice. You just got to love them a little more.
I think, Ben, the other thing, at the end of the day, if everything else is taken away, what's the most important thing to us? And that's family. I haven't heard of a person yet that doesn't put their family above everything else. And so long as everyone has the vision, at the end of the day, raising kids, wherever you do, if it's not about family, then what is your purpose?
Yeah, and if family is your purpose and you're really, really driven by that and mean that, what are you doing to put that at the forefront of everything?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, look, that's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed that today. I just want to say thank you for being so open and honest. I know when it comes to families and relationships and things like that, it never ever goes smooth sailing, but most people don't want to talk about it. And we see families out there that are, as they're called, high-performing families or successful families, or families you just think are doing okay. And when you pull back the curtain, things aren't always perfect all the time. So I really appreciate that. And I reckon at some stage, Kacie, we might have a chat about life goals, especially when it's coming up to retire.
We're not retiring, Ben. You keep putting this word retirement in there. We're just going to do other things.
Excellent. Some people get really upset with me when I say that, Kacie, and I say, well, retirement can be whatever the bloody hell you want.
And I think that's how we view it, that we're stepping back from the main business to do other things that float our boat.
Well, and you'll have more time to be able to focus on training up Ardie.
Done a terrible job today.
I think she's done okay. Excellent. Well, look, thanks very much for you guys, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
Cheers.
So, wow, all done. One of the things I love about my life and also my business and job is the fact that I get to deal with some really cool people and, more importantly, really cool families. And I always get a kick out of having a conversation with them. It uplifts my energy and I always learn something. And what I want to say is it's one of those things that everyone thinks it's a mystery as to why some families are prosperous and do better than others. And when you talk to them, you really start to see it's pretty damn obvious. And the one thing when you're in business is it has to be all about the family. If the family's dysfunctional, if the family's not communicating, if the family's not aligned, nothing's going to eventually work. Or maybe it'll work for a while, but then eventually the wheels will fall off. And more money is not the solution, and scale. So the common thing people say to me is that scale, Ben, if you've got more scale or more money, it makes it a whole lot easier. And I just want to refer you on to Gina Reinhardt, her and her family are a prime example example. No disrespect to Gina in any way, other than, 2 generations in and we've got family fighting over money, which must be terribly disheartening for the family as a whole. So my number one piece of advice to you is, if you're going through succession, if you're wanting to drive your business forward and grow your family business, is to start to invest an appropriate amount of time in, working on family communication, building relationships, and then getting aligned and all driving towards a common goal. I think they're the 3 keys. So that was a great episode. If you've got any feedback, send me an email, ben@thefinancialbloke.com.au. And just remember, if you've enjoyed this, go back and have a listen again. Sometimes you pick up a lot more stuff the second time around, and make sure you share it with your family and friends. The further we can share with people success stories, the better off as an industry will be. So that's it for today. I'll see you on the next episode.